1 Samuel chapter 28, we're going to drop in verse 3. We'll actually look at the remainder of this chapter, but we're going to start by just reading a few verses. 1 Samuel chapter 28, beginning with verse 3. We're told at this point that Samuel, he's the prophet of God, that he has died, and all Israel had lamented for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the spiritists out of the land. But the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped at Shunem. So Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped at Gilboa. But when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by the prophets. And Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said, "In fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor." Now, we're going to pick up the rest of the story in a few minutes, but again, this is what I want you to think this morning. If we are practicing this Laverne and Shirley theology, and if we are very much doing things, or to varying degrees doing things our way, then there's going to be some indicators. There's going to be some ways that we're going to be able to look back and see that at work and at play in our lives. And here's the first way. You do good things for the wrong reasons. You do good things for the wrong reasons. Saul's reign as king at this point has been unraveling for a number of chapters. Really, one of the pivotal moments is back in chapter 15. If you remember that God had given Saul and Israel's armies very specific instructions that they were to go to fight the Amalekites, and they were to bring back no spoils of victory and leave no survivors. But you remember, Saul didn't exactly do that. In fact, he spared their king, kept some of the choicest of animals, and because of that act of absolute clear-cut disobedience, God decided, well, that's going to be the end of your reign. I'm going to find one and select one to replace you who is actually a man after my own heart. And so we know in chapter 16 that God has selected and already anointed David. Well, at this point, though, as these chapters continue to unfold, Saul's life is very much unraveling. He is consistently demonstrating through his actions, God, you can just keep your seat. I've got all this stuff taken care of. I'm going to do things my way, and I can take care of all of this stuff on my own. But because he's doing that, he's really experiencing some seismic difficulties. On one front, he is having to deal with nearly constant skirmishes with the Philistines, and they have been a perennial enemy for the nation of Israel, and it's like constantly there's another fight, another battle, another skirmish. So he's dealing with external threats, but he's also dealing with what he views to be an internal threat. He views David as somebody that is a real challenge to his reign and to his leadership, and so on one front he is sending his armies out to fight the Philistines, and on another front he's sending his soldiers out to hunt down, to track down and see if they can kill David. Saul is very much a torn and tormented man. And as chapter 28 begins, though, in verse 3, we're told that Samuel has died. And Samuel very much is he was certainly a hero for the people of Israel at that point, but really for all those who have followed, Samuel is really one of the great heroes of the Bible in either Old or New Testament. He was a man that was absolutely shot through with character and integrity and conviction. And most of the time, a lot of these biblical characters that we see, we very much see them warts and all, and how on one side they did such good things and on the other they did such bad. But really, we see a life of absolute consistent godliness in Samuel's life. But at this point, he's dead. He's died, and they have gone back to his home city, to his hometown in Ramah, and they have buried him there. And we're told that all Israel lamented. Everybody was touched and grieved now by Samuel's absence. For decades, he has very much been the mouthpiece of God among the Lord's people, and now that voice has been silenced. And so, what then does Saul do? Now that Samuel, the prophet of God, this one that really symbolizes what God is going to do and what he seeks to communicate through his people, once he's gone, what does Saul do? It seems that immediately he does something. You see it in verse 3 that Saul had the mediums and the spiritists put out of the land. Now, as this passage continues to unfold, we're going to see exactly how these mediums and spiritists operated. But very simply, it was a group of individuals scattered throughout the country that portrayed themselves to be, or presented themselves as mediums between the physical world and the spiritual world. And if you wanted to contact a dead loved one, you didn't need AT&T or Time Warner or any of that. You would go to one of these spiritists, and they could conjure or supposedly conjure up your deceased loved one, and you would be able to converse with them. They would be able to say things to you through the medium, and you would be able through the medium to say things to them. Here's the question. Should these people have been allowed to practice this act among the people of God? Absolutely not. Was this wrong? Absolutely it was. These mediums, these spiritists, in essence, these witches, had no place among the people of God, but they were there. And it seems they have been there for some time. But Saul doesn't do anything about this until Samuel is gone. And as soon as Samuel is gone, Saul decides, let's get these people, we got to boot them out, we got to get these people out of Israel. And that's exactly what he does. Here, though, is the question. Was it a good thing for these people to be kicked out? Absolutely it was. Was it a God-honoring thing to put out this ungodly influence among God's people? Absolutely, it was a godly thing. It was emphatically the right thing to do. So you say, well, what's the problem? Well, the problem, I believe, is this, and it's to think through this question and then answer it. Why did Saul do this? Why for generations has he permitted this, but now Samuel is dead and he decides it's time to get these people out of here. We cannot have this godless influence. We cannot have this, in essence, form of witchcraft and sorcery going on among the people of God. We got to get it out now. Well, what exactly was it that motivated him? Here's the question I think to think about. Was Saul a godly man with godly intentions? A man bent on doing what was right regardless of the circumstance? And have we seen that at play in his life? Was he a man motivated by pure intentions and not led by blind ambition and the goals of personal advancement? Was Saul a man who sought to do everything to the extent possible in the ways in which God had instructed? Was he any of those things? No, he wasn't any of those things. In fact, Saul was an egotistical, self-serving man, very much bent on doing things not God's way, but his way. His choices and decisions were ultimately motivated not by what is right, but what most benefits me. What has the greatest positive impact on me? What further advances my goals, my dreams, my ambition, and my personal pursuits? That's what motivated Saul. Well, with that in mind, why then did he kick these people out? I believe very simply it's this. Samuel, this great spiritual leader among the people of God, is now dead. His voice has been silenced. There's this vacuum of spiritual leadership that now exists among the people of God. And Saul thinks to himself, you know what? I believe I can really, really garner people's affection. And they can come to see me not merely as the head of state and the head of government, but really the head of faith. That I can become this individual through whom not only the orders for the execution of government are decreed, but also I can portray myself as the one through whom God speaks to his people. In short, what I'm saying is that Saul did the right thing, but he was doing them for the wrong reasons. And that's indicative of what's going on when somebody is practicing Laverne and Shirley theology. It's not that they do nothing but bad things. They'll do some good things, but the motivation behind those good deeds, those seemingly godly acts, is anything other than godly. A number of years ago, I had gone to see a friend of mine who was a student at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and I'd gone to visit him, and while I was there, David introduced me to Bluebell ice cream. I don't know if you've ever had that, but that was the first time I'd ever had it. It was not at that point in the Carolinas, and I remember the first flavor that I had was cookies and cream, and it had just enormous hunks of Oreos in it. It was the best cookies and cream ice cream I had ever had, and I thought, man, this stuff, this is delicious. Well, it was a short time after I got back home that I began to see that Bluebell had started to make their way into the Carolinas, and you could start to buy this at some of the grocery stores around town. And so I started buying Bluebell really in biblical proportion, 70 times 7. And the honest truth is that every night I was having a bowl of Bluebell ice cream, and I still believe to this day it's the best store-bought ice cream that's out there, and one of the few flavors that when you buy a half gallon, you actually get a half gallon, because now what is it? They give you what used to be a half gallon is essentially like a spoonful. And so anyway, Bluebell still comes in a half gallon. They had some great flavors. I remember one night, though, that I had got a brand new half gallon out of our freezer. It was, as I recall, chocolate covered cherry. And I got this heaping bowl of ice cream, and I go sit down in the den to eat it. And I grab the spoon, I get a spoonful of it, I put it in my mouth, I begin to chew, and all of a sudden I hit something hard. And my first thought, well, maybe it was a pit from a cherry or something like that. And then I thought, well, maybe I have lost a filling, and that has come out. And so I do this, and it comes out, and I've got 2 small pieces of glass in my mouth. It wasn't a crime. Easy. Anyway, but there's 2 small pieces of glass that I have discovered in this ice cream. And at that point, I told Caroline about it, and I put these things in a bag, and you wonder, what did I do next? I ate the rest of the bowl of ice cream. I hate to waste good ice cream. And I did so gingerly, but I ate the rest of that bowl. But the rest of it I left in the freezer. And the next day, I got on the internet and I looked up Bluebell's information. Their corporate headquarters are out in Texas, and I called the number that was listed there. And I got somebody in customer service, and I explained to them what had happened. And I said it was a brand new half gallon of ice cream. Put scoops in the bowl, and there were these little small pieces of glass. And first of all, they were very apologetic, but they were also puzzled, because they said, in none of our facilities is there any glass. We have absolutely no idea how that got in there. What we would, however, like to get, though, is that glass so that we can do some testing on it, maybe to determine where it came from, but also to get that half gallon of ice cream as well. We can see the batch run and all that kind of stuff. And I said, that's fine. They explained that somebody was going to come to our house within the next day or so and pick that up. Well, sure enough, a day or two passes, and a Bluebell rep shows up at our house to pick up this remaining half gallon of ice cream plus the little baggie that had the glass in it. When I did that, though, Caroline asked me this simple question. She said, why didn't you just take it back to the store? Why did you go to the trouble to look up Bluebell's information and contact them and have them come out to the house? The reason for that is this. When they came out, they got this, but they gave me coupons, I believe, for 5 half gallons of ice cream, and then 5 like $2 off coupons. Now, they were grateful to get this back, and probably even more grateful that I had not consulted an attorney, given how litigious our society is. But ultimately, here's the question. I did the right thing by letting them know and giving this back to them. But why did I do that? Is it because of my pure intentions and my pure motives? I was wanting some free ice cream. Thank you, Howard. I just knew there was something in it for me. I did the right thing, but what ultimately motivated it was this mentality. There's something in this. In this particular instance, there's free ice cream in it for me. Yeah, I did the right thing, but I was doing so for less than pure reasons and motivations. Why did Saul do what he did? It was a good thing to kick these people out, but the reason he did so was not because it was right, rather because he thought there was something potentially in it for him. People will begin to look at him. People will begin to view him not merely as the head of state, but also the head of faith. That he'll gain more influence and greater appreciation in the hearts and the minds of his subjects. Perhaps it has been, to some degree, you have been operating that way. You have been doing some good things, to be sure. Even some things that the Bible speaks about that we ought to be doing. But if the curtain were to be pulled back and if you were to admit what might have been going on or has been going on in your mind or in your heart, in some instances it may be for this reason. You recognize, you know what, I have been doing an awful lot of bad things. A lot of things that displeased God. A lot of things that dishonored God. And it's difficult to admit to this. If the truth were told, it may very well be that you have been doing so many of these good things because in your mind you think, well, I can offset the bad with even more good. I would just remind you of the words of the hymn that so many of us have grown up with. What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Listen, there's no amount of good to make any amount of bad deeds go away, but some people operate in the notion, I'm going to do some good things, but their reason is faulty. Others do good things and perhaps serve in the church. Maybe you teach a Sunday school class or you volunteer in some way. You sing in the choir. And maybe no one else has any idea about this and no one suspects this whatsoever. But if the curtain were to be pulled back on your heart, the reason that you've been doing these good things is because you really like when somebody pats you on the back and says, you did a great job. It makes you feel so good. It makes you feel so proud. It's not that you're doing bad things, you're doing good things, but you're not necessarily doing them for the right reasons. What I want you to understand is that that's how Laverne and Shirley theology is at play in people's lives. They do the right things. They do good things, but they do them for the wrong reasons. By contrast, somebody that is dependent on, walking closely with, leaning on and leaning hard into the Lord, do you know what ultimately motivates them doing the right thing? Because God said to do it, and that makes it right. Whether people praise you or whether people wave their fists at you, whether there's a cost to it or whether there's a benefit to it. It's right because God said to do it, and I'm going to do it. And the simple reality is that's what God's looking for. Yeah, there may be some benefit, and certainly there are blessings that come from obedience, but God is looking for those that will walk with Him and serve Him and be used by Him from pure motivation to do the right thing, to do the good thing because it's right and because it's good. But when this, I'm going to do it my way, theology is at play, well, we do good things for the wrong reasons. But there's another telltale sign, and that's this. You seek from God what you want and leave the rest. You seek from God what you want and leave the rest. In verse 5, we're told that Saul sees the army of the Philistines, and he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. Now, again, they have had a number of fights and an entire series of skirmishes that have been going on for years with the Philistines. But Saul recognizes this gathering, this amassing of forces that's going on in the Philistines. This one's different. As Fred Sanford would say, this looks like the big one. And he recognizes this is perhaps not just any battle. This may be the decisive battle. And as he gets reports back about their numbers and about their equipment, about their weaponry, about all of those things, he begins, it seems, to look at his own forces, his own weaponry, and recognizes we're outgunned, we're outmanned, we're outmatched. And because of this, his heart trembled greatly. He was scared to death. With this type of threat looming, Saul recognizes, I need to do something, but it had better be the right thing. And I don't know exactly what to do. Should I go ahead and attack them? Should I wait and respond through a defensive strategy? What exactly should I do? Should I seek some sort of peace treaty? I need some guidance. Where's Samuel? Well, Samuel's dead and gone. The mouthpiece of God has been silenced. So he calls out to God, and we're told in verse 6 that he inquired of the Lord, but God does not respond. He calls out to heaven, and heaven in response is silent to Saul. God, I need your help. I need to know what to do. These are the options that I'm aware of, and I don't know which is right. Maybe there's another thing I haven't thought of. Will you show me what to do? And as he listens, he hears nothing in response. So what does he do? Verse 7, Saul tells his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." I've called out to God. God's not responding, so I got to take care of this. I've got to know what to do. I've got to have some guidance. I have got to have some direction. I need some measure of certainty as to what it is that I should do. Samuel's gone. God's not saying anything. I need you to go and find a medium for me. So what he does in the verses that follow, in verse 8, we're told he disguised himself. He put on other clothes, so he takes his crown off. He takes the royal robes off, and he dresses in bib overalls and plain Jane sandals, and he's trying to look as ordinary as he can. And he goes to this woman at night with the hopes that no one will be aware of what it is that he is doing. And in verse 8, he asks her to conduct a seance for me and bring up for me the one I shall name to you. Now, we'll talk more about this, the whole seance thing, in a minute. But this is what I want you to get. Saul has called out to God, "Lord, will you guide me? Will you show me what to do? Will you show me which path I should take?" And God doesn't say anything. God does not respond. Our question then is why? Well, I believe that the answer to that is this. Consistently, Saul has demonstrated this pattern of behavior where he communicated to God, "Hey, I've got this. I'm going to do things my way, and I don't really have to have your help. I don't really need you. This whole running a nation, this whole being one of your followers, and us collectively being your people, I got all this under control, and I really don't have to have anything from you." He was operating like a Lone Ranger that was operating with Laverne and Shirley theology, doing things his way. But finally, he gets to a point where he recognizes there's something I need from God. I need His input. I need His counsel. I need His direction. Now, I haven't been seeking that before. At this point, I recognize that I need it. So he calls out to God, and God doesn't respond. And again, the question is, why? When push comes to shove, I believe that God was not responding to Saul, and that what he got from God was silence, is because of what David communicates in Psalm 66. "If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me." If you're here today and you say, "Michael, I really believe sincerely, I've got a personal relationship with Christ. I have yielded my life to Him. He's the Savior of my heart, the Lord of my life." If you say that is true of you, I believe that the Bible absolutely teaches that once you become a child of God, once you're in the family, He doesn't kick you out of the family. You remain in the family. And I don't believe there's anything that causes the ending of that relationship. Now, that being said, I believe that there are plenty of things that we can do that absolutely challenge the fellowship that occurs within that relationship. In short, I believe that that's encapsulated with sin. That's defined by sin. And when you and I have sin in our heart, when you have sin in your heart, when I have sin in my heart, things between God and I, they're not okay. I can't just call out and say, "Hey, I need your help. Will you do this? Will you give me this? How about doing something in this instance?" and expect a response, because things between you and your Heavenly Father, they are not okay. And until they get okay, well, you can expect exactly what Saul got: silence. David said it again this way: if I am harboring iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. The lines of communication are broken. And until you come back to God with honest, plain confession and saying, "Lord, this is what I have done," and experience His forgiveness and cleansing from it, well, the lines of communication are going to remain broken. That's why I believe that God is silent towards Saul. But Saul was operating under this mentality: you know what, I don't have to do things God's way. I can do them my way. And I can operate consistently as though I don't need Him and though I don't really have to help Him. But when my back gets against the wall and when things get really difficult, I can come to God, and at that point I can get from Him what I need, and I will get those things, no strings attached. A few weeks ago, in fact, just about a week before April 15th, I finally got all of my information together to send to the CPA that's been doing my taxes for years so that he could get my return filled out. And so I sent that stuff to him. He sends me an email response back saying that I get nothing back from state and I owe the federal government $170. And I recognize that, it could be a lot worse. Some people owe thousands of dollars. I only owe 170. And so his name is Matt, and I called Matt after getting that, and I said, Matt, what's the problem? He said, what do you mean, what's the problem? I said, I just got your email, and it says I owe $170. He said, from my perspective, that looks like we called this about right. And I said, but I owe money. It shouldn't work that way. And so this was his question, because as a minister, the church doesn't do withholding. I have to do estimated quarterly taxes. So I have 4 times a year, I have to write a check out estimating what my taxes are going to be. And so he said, how do you want this for the 2014 year going forward? Do you want to pay more in throughout the course of the year so that you can get something back, or do you want us to kind of keep it at about this so that you either get just a little bit back or you paid a little bit in? How do you want to do this? I said, to be honest with you, I want to pay like nothing and get a whole lot back. Isn't that how we operate? I mean, that's how I feel about taxes. I want to pay none and get back a big fat refund. But the truth is, I think if we're honest, most of us operate that relative to the government. We don't want to pay any taxes, but we sure want these enormous refunds to come back paying nothing in. Unfortunately, I believe that mentality creeps into our walks with God, where we're going to put nothing in and have no costs paid by us, no standards erected that we have to follow, no guidelines that we need to live by, no discipline that we mete out and measure. We're going to do things our way. We're going to live independently from Him, but we're going to get all this stuff, all the goodies, the stuff that we want back. Pay nothing in and get enormous amounts out. Let me see if I can describe it another way. I wouldn't say at all that they are my favorite places to eat, but the truth is I enjoy going to cafeterias. I enjoy going to K&W. I enjoy going to J&S. And it's really neat because when you go in there, there's a number of different meats from which to choose. And so today it may be meatloaf and fried chicken and grilled chicken and roast beef and shrimp and flounder. And so those are the meats, and spaghetti. And then on the vegetable side, there's green beans and lima beans and collards and corn and squash casserole and mashed potatoes and all that stuff. And then there's these desserts, and there's these variety of different breads, there's these different drinks. I appreciate that, because if I go in and I say, I want meatloaf, and I want mashed potatoes, and I want green beans, and I want squash, and I want corn, I can get that. But if I don't want fish, I don't have to get it. If I want 2 orders of fish, though, I can get that. If I want a dessert, I can have it. If I want 3 desserts, I can have it. If I want a blueberry muffin and a biscuit, I can have both, because it's a cafeteria. And you come by and you get what you want, and you leave, you don't get that which you don't want. Let me then put this in very plain, simple terms. God's not running a cafeteria. He's not running a cafeteria. And it's not some line that you can get into as a follower of God where you'll say, okay, God, I want the blessing part. And how about giving me the guidance and encouragement? I really like that. And comfort when I need that, and guidance when I'm unsure. You give me that, but can you leave the correction part? Can you leave the rules and the standards part? Can you leave the whole discipline part? I just want to leave that there. God's not running a cafeteria. It's not a la carte. It's more like what you get with Time Warner or AT&T. It's more like a bundle. If you want the blessings, and if you want the guidance, if you want the comfort, if you want the encouragement, you can get that. But it comes in a bundle. That bundle involves obedience. That bundle involves discipline. That bundle involves trusting, relying on and depending on not you, but on Him. But when we're operating with Laverne and Shirley theology in our minds, we tell ourselves, you know what? I can get from God what I want, and I can leave the rest. Maybe you've been operating that way to some degree. You wouldn't necessarily sign up and raise your hand and say, yeah, that's me, but As God speaks to you through His Spirit, you can recognize, you know what, that's kind of what's been going on. And I've been giving Him nothing, but I've been really looking for everything. You recognize that God doesn't work that way. But there's one more final telltale sign. When this type of theology is at play in our lives, we seek then to manufacture godly results. You seek to manufacture godly results. Saul goes to this woman, this witch in Endor, and asks her in verse 8 to conduct a seance. And he says, I want you to bring up for me, in verse 8, the one I will name to you. She responds in verse 9, look, you know what Saul has done, how he's cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? She's saying, listen, I can't do this. We're under decree by the king. If I do something like this, it could very well be my head. She doesn't recognize that this is Saul. And so Saul swears to her, invoking the Lord's name. It's interesting. He says this, the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. As sure as God lives, and on my life, I'm telling you, nothing is going to happen to you. And so she says, all right, who then do you want to talk to? And Saul tells her, bring up Samuel for me. Now, this poses us with a question. Does this stuff work? I mean, because there are today, you could find one in Greensboro this afternoon that would portray themselves as some sort of medium or spiritist, and they may go by different titles, and they may use tarot cards, or they may read your palm or look into a crystal ball. But this stuff has been around forever. And the question, though, for us is this: does that stuff work? Well, all I can do is tell you where I come down on the issue and where my heart is, what my conviction is about this. And I believe ultimately the answer is no. I don't believe that they have that ability and that power. That being said, I do believe that Satan does have power. And I believe that there are supernatural ways that Satan can manifest himself. And I do believe all that stuff is not of God and it's entirely of Satan. I believe that. Furthermore, I believe this. Though I don't believe that individuals have the capacity to communicate with departed, dead people, dead spirits, I believe that what we see here is, in effect, a miracle, a singular instance, and an exception to the norm where God grants to Saul this singular opportunity. And I believe that's the case because it's clear God needs to say something to Saul, and he's going to get ready to get his attention. And so she conjures up Samuel. Verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel, she cries out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, you've deceived me, you're Saul. All of a sudden she recognizes, man, this is the king, the one who said, if you do this, you're going to die, that's now sitting in front of her. And Saul said to her, don't be afraid. And he says, what did you see? And she said, I saw this spirit, in verse 13, ascending out of the earth. And Saul said, what's his form? She said, he's an old man, he's covered with a mantle. And Saul thought, yeah, that's Samuel. That's Samuel. In verse 15, Samuel responds through this medium to Saul, asking a question, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul says, I'm deeply distressed. The Philistines make war against me. God has departed from me. He doesn't answer me anymore, neither by prophets or dreams. And so I've called you that you may reveal what I should do. Well, what Samuel ultimately responds is this. Here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you what to do. What's going to happen is that tomorrow you and your sons are going to die in battle. You got a day left. The clock's ticking. So in terms of application, what do we take away from this? I believe it's pretty simple what's going on. Saul has called out to God, and he's been operating with the cafeteria mentality. I can get from God what I want, no strings attached. I can harbor all the sin in my heart to any degree that I want, and just any time that I need something from God, I can still get that whenever I want. And he's discovering that it's not like Burger King. You don't get to have it your way with God. And so he needs this godly result. He needs godly counsel. He needs godly perspective. And since he cannot get it from God, he decides, I can come around the back door and I can get this. In essence, I can manufacture this on my own. And he comes to discover, no, he can't. No, he can't. Wolfgang Beltracchi is probably not a name that you have used this week. Maybe you're angry at your children. Wolfgang Beltracchi. No, you didn't. Anyway, probably have never heard that name unless recently you saw a segment, a piece on 60 Minutes. It was very interesting. Wolfgang Beltracchi is an artist. Paints portraits, amazing pictures. In about 40 years worth of painting, has made in excess of $50 million as an artist. You've heard about the starving artist sale. Wolfgang Beltracchi was never in line there. What's interesting, however, is that all of Wolfgang Beltracchi's pieces, all of his art, they're fakes. They're forgeries. But what's interesting, though, is that it's a different type of forgery. All of his paintings bear the name of famous artists. You'll see names like Rembrandt, Cézanne, Max Ernst. You'll see some of the greatest artists, what seems to be their work in the history of the art world. But what's interesting is that these aren't copies. He did not say, okay, here's a picture of the Mona Lisa, and I'm going to paint this and try to sell this as the Mona Lisa. He didn't do that. What he did was to study the works of these masterpiece artists, of Da Vinci, of Rembrandt, of Cézanne, of all these other artists, and he decided, you know what, this is kind of how they operated. This is their style. And so what he then did was to paint pictures that he thought they would have painted if they chose to do so. It's interesting. These are forgeries. This is not something that Cézanne painted. This German did these things. But he sold these things. He and his wife were in collusion together, and so what they did was they concocted this ruse where she said she had an uncle who was in Germany during World War II, and he was able to salvage these masterpieces that have never seen the light of day from various Jews that were getting carted off to concentration camps, and he held these, and so to safeguard them for the world and for society at large. And in the years that have followed, over a span of about 40 years, they sold these things, many of them for millions of dollars. Some of them are hanging in prestigious, well-known art galleries around the world. Others have been paid, the people have paid millions of dollars for to have them in their own private collections. But what happened, though, is that one of these pieces, somebody wanted to make sure, because it had never been published. Nobody had ever said that Da Vinci painted this picture. There was never been any other reference to it, and so they sent it for evaluation. And there's a process called Raman spectroscopy. And how that works is they take a little tiny piece of paint off of this artwork. And Beltracchi, he had been very intentional. He was going to be careful to use old canvases, and he was going to use paint, looking at the ingredients, making sure that those were ingredients that were found back when Da Vinci was painting or back when Rembrandt was painting. But one of these pieces of art, they did this process called Raman spectroscopy. They took a little smidgen of paint off of that, and they ran it through this evaluation process, and it revealed a titanium white paint that has only been used in the past 15 to 20 years. Rembrandt could not have bought that. Da Vinci could not have had that. This is clearly a forgery. So what the Germans then did was to charge him with a crime. They've alleged indicted him with 36 counts of creating these forgeries that sold those 36 paintings for over $46 million. The people have paid all of this money for, and they're forgeries. They've paid millions of dollars for these things, and now they are effectively worthless. Do you know why? Because only the real deal has real value. Only the real deal has value. Just because you paint Da Vinci's name in the corner of a piece of art doesn't mean that it's real. Doesn't mean that it has value. What you see going on in Saul's life is that he cannot get the godly result from God that he wants. And so he decides, I'm going to go around the back door and I want to make this happen on my own. And I'm going to get the result and essentially put God's name on it. And he comes to discover you cannot manufacture godly results through ungodly or godless means. There is an absolute lot that we can do, neither relying on or depending on God. We can generate conversations and conclusions that sound entirely spiritual. In worship services, we can, with the right music and the right words, coax people into making decisions that absolutely seem to be those that God would be wanting them to make. And we can do all sorts of things that seem to be God or what God is behind, when in truth what we are intentionally doing is trying to manufacture godly results without Him. And what I would say to you is what I would say of Beltracchi's work. Only the real deal has value. Only that which God really does, genuinely does, that has His impression on it, changes people's lives, provides the guidance that you need, provides the correction that is necessary, provides the encouragement, the comfort that you need at the time. But Saul didn't do that. He was doing things like Laverne and Shirley was doing it his way. Schlemiel, Schlemazel, Hassan Pfeffer Incorporated. We're going to do it our way. It's great for a sitcom lyric, but it is an absolute lousy way to live. God is looking for, in short, people that lean on and lean hard into Him. The question is, does He find that in you? Won't you bow your heads with me?